So I'm on Twitter the other day and I catch Brian Stelter of CNN. He has a show called Reliable Sources, which is basically a look at how the media is covering things. It's like a media criticism show on CNN every weekend. And he tweets out a tweet sharing a comment from a business owner in NYC. And Oliver Darcy of CNN, a reporter there, also shares it. So Brian Stelter basically tweets out art gallery owner NYC and embeds under it this rant from an art gallery owner NYC who's going on this anti-mask rant, completely against people bringing back any mask mandate, saying it removes joy from people and it's going to kill the tourism industry and all these other things that he's going on about. And Oliver Darcy says, one of the voices often missing from media coverage on these restrictions are business owners. And then I go online and check my email, and I come across the Reliable Sources newsletter that went out on Thursday. And under this part, 6 ideas for news coverage. Covering coronavirus has never been easy, and the task journalists face has become even more complex in recent days and weeks. Sometimes in such scenarios, it can be helpful to step back and question some of the basic aspects of the way stories are being reported and discussed. This is what I did on Wednesday, and I was left with 6 ideas about how to improve coverage across the board. And I scroll down, and I come across this. One of the 6 ways, make sure people affected by policy recommendations are represented. Eli Klein, an art gallery owner in NYC, that's the guy that Brian Stelter shined a light on, where hospitalizations and deaths are low, tweeted Wednesday, a mask mandate is a slowdown for all indoor entertainment venues, stadiums, gyms, theaters, concert halls, clubs, malls, stores, offices, etc. People don't want to do these things if they have to cover their face. He pointed out that a mask mandate in NYC would diminish tourism and beat up those already crushed by COVID restrictions. He says again here, let's hear more from voices like this. Again, let's hear more from business owners. I cannot believe this coming from these guys. Are you kidding me? Every single thing about this pandemic from day one has been centering the voices of business owners. Our actions, government policy and regulations has completely centered the business owners. People having to make money, the economy, letting businesses make money. It's all just been all about that 24/7. And don't just believe me. Please don't just believe me. I went online before doing this show and I thought to myself, let me take a few minutes. I didn't have much time to do it. So I said, let me take a few minutes and see how much coverage of business owners I could find. Now, one of these voices that CNN, Brian Stelter and Oliver Darcy is saying we should cover more. We're not hearing from these voices. So I thought to myself, how much has CNN been covering these voices? Has there been a lack of coverage? Has there been an empty void of business owners, at least on CNN, not about COVID restrictions and what's going on with policies around COVID and how it affects business owners? And I was looking, and I was starting to create a compilation of some of the things I was finding, but then I came across a clip where I didn't even have to do that. CNN themselves created a compilation of just some of the business owners they've talked to on their show. Let's see how they've been covering this. Some of these voices we just haven't been hearing from.
But to this point of people not going back, right? I mean, we're seeing it across the country. Yes, it's anecdotal, but it's in Democratic states. It's in Republican states. We've all seen the signs. I mean, here's just a few people we've spoken to, business owners in 3 Democratic states, New York, California, and New Mexico.
They're basically making too much on unemployment. It's easy to kick back and get a check every month and not have to do anything.
They're doing better with unemployment than actually going out to work.
We're supposed to go hire people to retain them, but at the same time you're paying unemployment. It creates a conflict of interest, so to speak.
That people are making on unemployment right now, quite honestly, is more than what we were paying them before.
Do you feel like you're competing with unemployment?
No question.
Those are the voices apparently we haven't heard from. Apparently, We've not heard enough from those people, those half a dozen people we just saw in that CNN compilation complaining about workers getting unemployment because it's making their life hard hiring workers to exploit to make money during a pandemic. This guy, I looked up, let me play him again, actually. Let me play this guy again, actually.
We're supposed to go hire people to retain them, but at the same time you're paying unemployment. It creates a conflict of interest, so to speak.
The amount
That guy complained about paying his employees more money. And, he went on in another article I saw saying he couldn't afford to do so, et cetera, et cetera. The dude was opening another restaurant, and he owns like a high-end New York, Manhattan restaurant. And then he's going ahead to open a new restaurant in Washington, D.C. as he's complaining about this. But let me now fast forward to more clips that I personally found centering these voices where we just haven't heard from, apparently.
They don't want to come out. They don't want to come out because the price isn't right.
How does unemployment fit into that piece?
People would rather just get the unemployment.
Because in many cases, it pays more. But that doesn't help employers like Josh Souter.
I have, employees that won't return my calls. I had one employee show up and quit 2 days later to go back on unemployment.
Souter runs a Drunken Crab in North Hollywood, California. When we met him at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, he had just laid off 75 employees.
Just take that in for a second. Listen to how they are covering this. They never cover these poor business owners, but listen to how they cover that. Woe is this guy who's trying to call his employees to come back to work, and they're not coming back to work, and the ones that are quitting, how dare they do that, right? How dare they sit at home and make more money on unemployment instead of going out there, risking their health to work for this guy who won't pay them more. But then they talk about right after, this guy had to, unfortunately, early in the pandemic, he had to lay them all off. Oh, okay. It's okay for this guy. It's okay for this guy to fire his employees for himself. But when it's time for them to come back, when it's time for his employees, when it's time for him to ask his employees to come back, they have the nerve for not coming back. Like, I am so frustrated here, honestly. The disconnect here. The poor guy had to fire his employees, and then they wouldn't come back when it was convenient for him. Unbelievable. But they haven't covered these guys enough, right? They haven't covered these guys enough. Literally every single thing that we've done during this pandemic has been to center businesses, been to center the economy. All this talk about getting people back to work. You have Andrew Cuomo. New York Governor Cuomo calls directly on private employers to bring employees back to work in person by Labor Day. Everyone has to be back in the office, Cuomo says. And as Zach Fink of New York One points out, this requirement would seem to align closely with the interests of commercial real estate in New York City facing a big hit. Everyone has to be back in the in person by Labor Day. Why by Labor Day? Really weird how all these special rule changes that just happen to be health related just seem to coincide with what's best for businesses. For example, how all of a sudden the restaurants in New York City reopened for Valentine's Day. What a coinkydink that COVID said, hey, we're going to drop in cases and I'm going to stop killing people in time for Valentine's Day because I don't want to hurt the poor restaurants of New York City. Fucking absurd. Just absurd. Think about the poor business owners. The next time we do coverage, we're not talking about them enough. Everything we've done, all those businesses that got to stay open during the pandemic. So putting people, the grocery store workers in the direct line of fire when it came to COVID deaths. The hospital workers, the forcing of reopening of schools, putting teachers in harm's way. They didn't sign up for life-threatening jobs. The whole idea to get parents back in the office so the schools have to reopen for that. Every single thing. Someone should do a study if there hasn't been already. How many unnecessary lives were lost because of the centering of those voices that apparently we're just not hearing enough of. And I looked it up too. All the coverage that I came across where CNN did talk to workers, it was all framed in the sense, oh, how does it feel to know you're making more money sitting home? Do you feel like you have an obligation to go back to work while interviewing a single mom or a recently laid off college student who's making minimum wage and trying to make their rent? Where's CNN, by the way, covering the the eviction moratoriums? Here they are centering those voices of business owners. We got to center more of them. The eviction moratorium is about to end. In New York alone, I was reading today, New York City alone, 500,000 people. No, I'm sorry, not people, households. 500,000 households. God, I could only think of how many children are living in those households. 500,000 households are behind in their rent and are facing eviction when this moratorium ends. It's coming. And there's no extension coming from the CDC. You got President Biden out there saying if we're going to extend it, we need Congress to act. How many of those renters have we heard from? You got homeless people. I see it in New York. Homeless people being evicted. While there's Delta variants going, this Delta variants going around and cases are flying up, we're now removing homeless people in New York City from the hotel rooms that we've put them up in during the pandemic, and we're putting them back into shelters where there are 12 people to a room. Are we out there talking to homeless people, CNN, to talk about their situation? If they're worried about dying? Because we're deciding, no more, we're not going to do this anymore. And I'll guarantee you, business has something to do with that. Hotels want their space back, I'm going to assume. Landlords want their money, right? Time to pay the piper. Oh, I was reading actually that the rent relief that was supposed to help out, in some states, something like less than 10% of that rent relief has gone out. Billions of dollars just sitting there as landlords are getting their evictions ready when that rent relief could be sent out to stop those evictions. Where's CNN covering that? Are they talking to are they going after whatever agency is dropping the ball there? Are they doing interviews with those people who haven't received their rent relief and are facing eviction as their landlords go to get them out? I'm mad, man. I'm pissed off. I've been talking about the oncoming renter crisis since the beginning of this pandemic. You can go back episodes to March 2020. It's been one of my major things about this pandemic. People lost their jobs. They got money from the government to stay home. That was enough to pay off bills in terms of buying food, paying for electricity, things like that. People obviously doing what they can to try to pay as much they could in rent, but not making enough to pay off their full monthly rent. And that shit's piling up. You think these people can go back to work and be able to save up 18 months of back rent while also paying their current rent? You out of your fucking mind. How is the lack of a mask mandate affecting the fast food workers making minimum wage at McDonald's and Burger King, dealing with thousands of people coming up to them, ordering without a mask in their face, spreading their germs all over them? All the various service workers across this country who got to deal with thousands of people in who knows what health condition, in who knows what sort of vaccine condition. Where's the interview with those people, the service workers who have to deal with this? Why don't you ask them how the lack of a mask mandate now is affecting them? How many people got sick and died? How many people got sick and had to stay home? How many people got sick and were fearful that they would spread it to their family members they live with? No, let's center more of the business voices. Garbage. And people wonder why the media is a joke?